I'm Nima Rajan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will join Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador at the White House next Thursday. U.S. President Joe Biden will host the first North American Leader Summit since 2016. The three leaders are expected to discuss a range of issues, including the pandemic, climate change, and migration. The Bank of Canada has defended its actions during the pandemic. This was hours after the country's opposition leader suggested the bank stay in its inflation-targeting lane. The Bank of Canada enacted extraordinary measures during the pandemic to help keep credit flowing and encourage low interest rates to spur demand. Governor Tiff Macklem says creating an inclusive recovery was fundamental to the central bank's role in helping to manage the economy. A decision on the central bank's mandate should be made by the end of this year or early next. Canada's banking regulator says it is launching consultations on proposed guidelines for the management of technology and cyber risks in the industry. The consultations were announced following recent ransomware attacks against Newfoundland and Labrador's health system and the Toronto Transit Commission. The Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institution says the guidelines will outline expectations in areas like accountability, risk identification, and disaster recovery. It says it will conduct consultations for 3 months. The Canadian government is facing pressure to waive the patent on the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. This to allow a Canadian manufacturer to export a low-cost version to Bolivia. The process is legal under the scarcely used Canadian Access to Medicines regime. It was designed to allow export of patented medicines to developing nations facing public health crises, such as HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Bolivian Minister of Foreign Trade and Integration, Benjamin Blanco, partnered with the federal NDP to announce that the country's request has been ignored for months. Several other groups have called for Canada to add COVID-19 vaccines to the list of drugs under regime. The emergency department in a western Manitoba hospital has been temporarily closed on weekdays. This comes after losing one doctor and a lab technician. Prairie Mountain Health has suspended ER services in the community of Roblin, which is about 400 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg. It is creating further stress for some area residents who were already concerned about access to emergency care. Ontario is pausing its plan to lift capacity limits in the remaining settings where proof of vaccination is required. This is following a rise in COVID-19 cases. But Dr. Kieran Moore, Ontario's top doctor, says that move will be delayed for at least 28 days as he monitors the COVID-19 caseload. The province says hospital and intensive care capacity remains stable, but the positivity rate is increasing. Ontario reported 454 new cases of COVID-19 today. The English Montreal School Board says it's disappointed with the latest court decision concerning Quebec's secularism law. A lower court previously exempted the board from Bill 21. Quebec is appealing that exemption to the Provincial Court of Appeal. While that process is underway, the board asks the appeals court to allow it to go ahead and hire staff who wear religious symbols. But Justice Frederic Bachand has ruled that the school board did not prove it would suffer serious prejudice if Bill 21 is applied while the government appeal is ongoing. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture says CN Rail is on track to support its Hay West campaign to send hay to drought-stricken prairie farmers. The association says CN has pledged up to $250,000. Hay West helps farmers in the West who are suffering from a hay shortage due to drought. Farmers from the East Coast, as well as Ontario and Quebec, have donated hay to be sent out west to help feed livestock. Nova Scotia is showing its annual love to Boston for its contribution to the recovery effort after the Halifax explosion in 1917. The province sends a Christmas tree to Boston every year for the city's Christmas celebrations. The cutting ceremony took place in Cape Breton. All right, well, move over, Sid the Kid. Justin Bieber is Tim Hortons' latest celebrity pitchman. Tim's is teaming up with the superstar, a lifelong company fan, to launch 3 new Timbits called Tim Biebs. The story of Trevor Green inspired the $312 million Legion Veterans Village in Surrey, BC, that will open late next year. Mr. Green survived being struck in the head with an axe during a Taliban ambush in 2006. He says his experience will help provide the framework for veterans to receive the care and support they need to recover. He is taking on an advisory role at the center. All right, stay tuned. We'll have more news from around the world only on Forum Daily, up next. Welcome back. Up next, we take a look at Forum Daily News' weekly market update with Catherine Murray. All yours, Catherine.
Thank you, Nima. Hello and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, markets are relatively unchanged today after setting record closes. The U.S. markets closed slightly lower yesterday. That's after setting the longest run of record closes since 1997. Meanwhile, the TSX set another record close yesterday. The path of least resistance has been higher, driven by earnings results, COVID trends, COVID treatment news, and a U.S. federal bank that has struck the perfect tone in terms of pulling back their stimulus via tapering their bond buying program, but keeping rates lower for longer. In other words, allowing the economic recovery to take hold before they raise rates. Now, having said that, and what could call all of that into question, although the market is brushing it off today, is U.S. inflation. The reading, CPI, hit its highest level since 1997, with inflation up 6.2% year over year versus expectations of up 5.9%. Now, Xing out food and energy, and I don't know why we would want to do that because it's what we all pay for. The reading, CPI in the United States, is the highest number we've seen since 1982. Many economists and strategists are still saying that inflation and the effects will be transitory, and that they do not expect the U.S. Federal Reserve to have to change course and chase inflation by raising rates. And that is what the equity market is telling us as well. But it is a topic and a debate that I continue to see us having, so be aware of that and how that impacts your pocketbook. Now, in terms of sector moves today, we are seeing energy lag, both here in Canada and the United States. But keep in mind, it has been a top-performing sector, so maybe a little profit-taking. Consumer discretionary in the United States is leading the markets. It's being helped by a rebound in Tesla shares, which are up by about 3% today, down by 10% yesterday, obviously on Elon Musk's news that he's selling part of his holdings because of a tax issue or tax news in the United States. Other notable performers, Pfizer stock. That stock has been on a great tear, up 8% last Friday on positive clinical data of their COVID pill. The stock is up another 3% today as Pfizer gets more approvals for their COVID booster shot, yes. In Canada, the TSX is trading lower. Materials are higher, though, on the day. There are no major economic data points today, but the future of Enbridge Line 5 is very much in focus, particularly as we enter the winter months. There are also reports of a Canada-US-Mexico summit to take place. Don't know the date, but it would be the first summit since 2016. Unknown what the agenda would be, but thoughts on it would be immigration, trade, as well as the economy. In terms of a couple Canadian stocks to note, Linamar is up 7%. The company posted better than expected third quarter earnings. Revenue, just to put this in perspective, was $1.6 billion for the quarter, better than expectations. And they also raised their dividends, so watch that stock. Also, another stock to note, GE. That stock is trading a little bit higher. It's getting an upgrade over at Deutsche Bank. And the price target there is $131. The analyst over at Deutsche Bank is noting a sum of the parts analysis valuation that is attractive, given the fact that they announced a breakup of their divisions this week. So one to watch as well. Lastly, Algonquin Power was upgraded over at BMO. And that does it for me, Nima. Back to you.
Lots to keep an eye out for, Catherine. Thanks for that. For more analysis and news on the markets, catch Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. All right, well, meanwhile, vehicle production has started up again at GM's Oshawa plant. Operations at the Oshawa assembly plant shut down at the end of 2019, but the company has vowed to invest over $1 billion to reopen it. The company had initially planned to restart production early next year, but that was moved up as GM cited a strong demand for pickups. The automaker says the first Chevrolet Silverado pickup on the retooled line was finished today. The number of bankruptcies in Canada was down 12% in the third quarter from the previous year, but overall insolvencies edged higher. The Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy says there were over 6,700 bankruptcies compared to over 7,600 a year ago. But that number of proposals to settle debts under conditions other than the existing terms rose 9% to just under 15,000. That pushed total consumer and business insolvencies to 21,649. That is up 1.5% from last year's third quarter. A draft statement coming out of the UN climate talks says governments are considering calling for a global end to coal use. The early version of the document is circulating at the negotiations in Glasgow, Scotland, and it also expresses alarm and concern about how much the Earth has already warmed. It urges countries to cut carbon dioxide emissions by around half by 2030. In one significant move, countries would urge one another to accelerate the phasing out of coal and subsidies for fossil fuels, but the draft doesn't refer to ending the use of oil and gas. All right, up next, an interview with the Canadian Women's Foundation. Stay tuned. A captive 16-year-old North Carolina girl was rescued on an interstate highway in Kentucky. This was after another driver noticed her silent distress signal. The secret hand signal is being promoted on TikTok. It is done by raising your hand, palm out, with thumb extended, then tucking your thumb in and lowering your fingers over it. It is a plea for help from domestic violence. The signal for help was launched by the Canadian Women's Foundation in response to COVID-19. And joining us now to tell us more about this campaign is Andrea Gunraj, Vice President of Public Engagement at the Canadian Women's Foundation. Ms. Gunraj, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about this Signal for Help campaign and how it was put together.
Sure. The Signal for Help is something that the Canadian Women's Foundation started in April 2020, last year, because we knew that there would be a bump in gender-based violence in the pandemic. We've seen this globally. This is violence like intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, and emotional abuse. So in addition to that, we knew that people were using video calling a lot more as well, too. Those two factors together made it really appropriate for us to release a tool to help people not only silently communicate that they need support without leaving a digital trace, but also allowing people to know that somebody needs help and be able to respond to it. And just to let you know, the Signal for Help is just a quick, one-handed tuck your thumb in to your hand, and it means I need you to check in with me safely.
And I know this signal became quite popular on TikTok. So is this something that the Canadian Women's Foundation had intended for it to be popular online?
Of course, we wanted people to share it and use it in as many ways as they wanted to. We didn't have a TikTok channel when we started this, when we started sharing it out. It was wonderful to see people using it and remixing it in lots of different ways for their communities and made it their own. And certainly, I'm particularly thankful to young people who were users on TikToks doing this to be able to get the word out. And of course, we had lots of partners and lots of media support to get it shared around the world.
And we mentioned the story of the 16-year-old girl from North Carolina. Can you tell us a little bit more about how many other women this signal has helped?
Well, we know that at least 1 in 3 Canadians by July of last year knew the Signal for Help or saw it being used. So it's a good indication that it's being used quite readily. And we also heard about a few other confirmed cases where somebody used it to say, I need help, and they were able to get help after the fact. We heard about a young person in Canada who used it to address family violence. We heard about a YouTuber who also used it in her channel to get support. So those are just a couple of instances, but we know for as many cases that we hear in the media, there might be thousands that we don't know about. And we just want to make sure that people can use it with their friends and family and peers who they tend to report to when they're experiencing violence.
And what are some other signs or signals of a person being trafficked, abducted, or abused, ma'am?
Well, we do know that there are lots of campaigns out there. We heard about a campaign where you put a black dot on your thumb to indicate to somebody that you need help, you're in immediate danger. We've also heard of a campaign based in the States where you call for a pizza, but you're actually calling emergency services for help. There's tons of campaigns like this. But it's important for us to recognize that signs and signals can happen in lots of different ways. We all know somebody who's experienced this type of violence. In Canada, 44% of women experience some form of sexual, physical, or emotional abuse in their lifetimes. So it's very common. We need to proactively know about this. And anytime there's somebody in our life who needs help, we need to volunteer our support and say, I'm going to help you. I'm not going to judge you. You can come to me anytime.
All right, Ms. Gunraj, so what kind of steps can an individual take to help someone if they think a victim is being abused?
Well, certainly the best thing to do is reach out to somebody and say, hey, I'm here. Just make it available for them. And when they are safe, they can get in touch with you and let you know what they need. Let them be the lead. They're the experts of their own safety. They might tell you they just want you to know what's happening and be a kind, non-judgmental listener. They might want to know other services and supports. So know those services and supports for gender-based violence in your community so that you can help them get to it. They might ask you to call the authorities. Whatever they need, you can help them get it, but let them lead the way. And of course, if somebody uses the signal for help in a moving vehicle, or if they're doing it out of a window just to the world, you can pretty much assume that they need emergency help right then. It is fine, I think, to call 911 or emergency services in that case.
Some very important advice there, Ms. Gunraj. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be back after the break with stories from around the world. Germany is asking Russia to get involved in the Poland-Belarus border dispute. We'll have that story and more after a short break, so stay tuned. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has called Russian President Vladimir Putin to ask him to help resolve a migrant crisis at the border between Belarus and Poland. Ms. Merkel told Mr. Putin that the Belarusian regime's exploitation of migrants against the European Union is inhuman and completely unacceptable. European Union leaders accuse Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko of opening up a new migration route to Europe. They say this is to create instability in retaliation for EU sanctions. Young people living in Pacific Rim countries want to see more ambition from their leaders when it comes to tackling climate change. They also want to see money devoted to a shared fund to prepare for future pandemics. Those were two of the messages delivered to New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. It was by 124 youth delegates taking part in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Virtual Forum. The UN is responding to a speech delivered to the Security Council by Mexico's president on Tuesday. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador warned that the world is sliding from civilization to barbarity. He called for the 1,000 richest people, the 1,000 largest private corporations, and the 20 major economies to improve life for the 750 million people now existing on less than $2 a day. A UN spokesman responded that globally, poverty rates fell from 36% in 1990 to 8.4% in 2019. The United Nations says Ethiopian authorities have arrested and detained around 70 truck drivers contracted to the UN and other aid groups in the past week. Wednesday's statement says the UN is seeking the reasons for the arrests since November 3rd in the city of Smara. It is the gateway for aid convoys struggling to reach the Tigray region. The UN has described the region as being under a, quote, de facto humanitarian blockade. A government spokesman did not respond to questions. The leaders of Malaysia and Indonesia have urged military-ruled Myanmar to resolve its internal conflict. Malaysian Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob, on an official visit to Indonesia Wednesday, expressed concern about the emergency situation in Myanmar. The February 1st military takeover has also led to more minority Muslim Rohingya to leave Myanmar. More than 200,000 Rohingya have resettled in Malaysia in recent years. Mr. Yaakob said that if the Rohingya could settle peacefully in Myanmar, it would decrease the number of refugees leaving for Malaysia. Well, as vaccination rates rise in many parts of the world and countries gingerly ease restrictions, China is doubling down on its zero-tolerance policy. It includes strict lockdowns, multiple rounds of mass testing, and centralized quarantine. China pioneered the approach during the first major outbreak of the virus in Wuhan. It continues the approach now, even after fully vaccinating 77% of its population. For authorities in Beijing, control over the virus has become a point of pride and a tool of propaganda for their form of government. Fumio Kishida has been re-elected as Japan's prime minister. This after his governing party scored a major victory in key parliamentary elections. Elected just over a month ago by Parliament, Mr. Kishida called a quick election. This led his party to secure 261 seats in the 465-member lower house. The October 31st victory increased his grip on power and is seen as a mandate from voters for his government to tackle the pandemic-battered economy, manage the coronavirus, and address other challenges. Well, Canadians aren't unique in trying to cope with higher prices. Prices for American consumers jumped 6.2% last month from last year's levels. It is the highest inflation rate the U.S. has recorded since 1990. Fast food prices soared 7.1%, which is a record high, reflecting higher costs for beef and other foods, as well as rapidly rising labor costs. A top European Union court has rejected Google's appeal of a €2.4 billion fine. The EU's top competition watchdog had punished Google in 2017. This was for unfairly directing visitors to its own shopping service to the detriment of competitors. The EU's General Court said Wednesday that it largely dismisses Google's appeal of that antitrust penalty and is upholding the fine. Dennis McKenzie was diagnosed with PTSD soon after he returned from a 7-month deployment in Afghanistan in 2007 and received a medical discharge from the military in 2013. He tried several therapies since, but nothing worked as well as music. His album, The Guardian Angel Platoon, is being released today. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News.